Meadowbrook Estates was supposed to be my sanctuary. 3 years ago, I purchased my first home here, a modest three-bedroom with a small garden and a view of the community pool. The brochure promised well-maintained streets, safety, and a sense of community. What it failed to mention was Karen Henderson. Karen did not just live in our neighborhood. She ruled it. As treasurer of the HOA board, she wielded the community bylaws like a medieval executioner wields an axe. Her house sat at the entrance to our cul-de-sac, a strategic position that allowed her to monitor every coming and going. It was a sprawling colonial with pristine white columns and immaculate landscaping that never showed a single weed or wilted flower. I first encountered Karen exactly 9 days after moving in. I had placed my trash bins at the curb the night before collection, as instructed by the welcome packet. The following evening, I returned from work to find a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. Violation. Waste receptacles must be removed from street view within 2 hours of collection. Fine, $50. I stared at the notice in disbelief. I had been at work. It had been physically impossible for me to move the bins within that time frame. The next morning, I knocked on Karen's door, violation notice in hand. She answered wearing tennis whites, though I never once saw her play in the 3 years since. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her smile never reached her eyes. "I am afraid rules are rules," she said, lips pursed as she examined my notice. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that waste receptacles cannot remain visible from the street. We have standards in Meadowbrook." "But I was at work," I explained. "I cannot leave in the middle of my shift to move trash cans." Karen tilted her head slightly. "Perhaps you should consider hiring someone to handle these matters if your schedule is too demanding. Or perhaps Meadowbrook is not the right fit for your lifestyle." That was my first lesson in Karen's world. The rules existed not for community order, but as tools of control. Over the months that followed, I watched her issue violations to elderly Mrs. Patterson for Christmas decorations left up 3 days too long. She cited the Johnson family when their son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. She even fined the new widower on Oak Court for planting unapproved tulips in memory of his late wife. Yet Karen's own infractions went mysteriously unnoticed by the board. Her massive holiday light display stayed up well into February. Her teenage son parked his sports car on the lawn when friends visited. Her dogs roamed unleashed through the neighborhood park, despite the prominent leash-required signs that she herself had petitioned for. The most blatant of her double standards involved the fire lane by the community pool. A bright red strip of curb with bold white lettering declared "No parking, fire lane" along the entire length of the pool access road. This was the only way emergency vehicles could reach the pool area or the back half of our neighborhood. Every resident understood its importance, except Karen. "I need to unload supplies," she would say, leaving her white Range Rover parked there for hours during her pool visits. "It will just be a minute," she would claim, as her vehicle sat blocking the lane through entire swim team practices. When others did the same, violation notices appeared on windshields within minutes. We all saw it. We all knew it was wrong. But Karen had manufactured a climate of fear in Meadowbrook. Cross her and suddenly your fence height might be measured, your grass length scrutinized, your paint colors questioned. So we stayed silent. We averted our eyes. We paid our ridiculous fines. And Karen continued her reign, unchallenged and unchecked. Until the day of the pool party, the day everything changed. The invitation appeared in all our mailboxes on a sweltering Tuesday in July. Printed on glossy cardstock with a holographic border, it announced, "Annual Henderson Summer Splash, this Saturday, 2 p.m. 10 p.m. at Meadowbrook Community Pool. Adults only after 8 p.m. At the bottom, in smaller print, note, parking will be limited. The fire lane will be reserved for event organizers and special guests. I read those words again. The fire lane will be reserved, as if a critical safety feature was now a VIP parking section. I was not the only one confused. That evening, several neighbors gathered at the edge of my driveway, invitations in hand. "Can she actually do this?" asked Robert from across the street. "Close down the entire community pool for a private party." Maria, who lived 2 doors down, sighed. "She did it last year, too, called it a community building event, but only invited the people she likes." "What about the fire lane?" I asked. "That is clearly against regulations." "Good luck enforcing that," Robert scoffed. "Who is going to stop her? The HOA? She is the HOA." Saturday arrived with brutal heat, the temperature climbing past 95 degrees by noon. From my kitchen window, I watched Karen direct a parade of delivery trucks. Caterers unloaded trays of food. Rental companies brought tables, chairs, and a massive inflatable flamingo for the pool. 2 bartenders began setting up beside the community grill area. By 2 o'clock, cars lined every available street space. Then, exactly as she had planned, Karen's guests began parking along the fire lane. First came a black Mercedes, then a silver Lexus. Soon, the entire red-painted curb disappeared behind a wall of luxury vehicles. In the center of this automotive display sat Karen's white Range Rover, positioned directly in front of the main pool gate for maximum convenience. I stepped outside onto my porch, the humidity instantly dampening my shirt. The sound system Karen had installed boomed with bass-heavy music that rattled windows 3 houses down. Children screamed and splashed in the pool while adults cluttered around the bar area, drinking from plastic champagne flutes. Karen herself held court from a decorative throne-like chair positioned at the edge of the pool. She wore an enormous sun hat and designer swimwear, waving imperiously as new guests arrived. When someone had the audacity to question the parking situation, I overheard her dismissive response. "It is just for today. Nothing is going to happen. And if there is an emergency, people can move their cars. Do not be such a worrier." The party grew louder as the afternoon progressed. By 6 o'clock, the crowd had doubled in size. Alcohol flowed freely, and the behavior grew increasingly chaotic. Teenagers who were clearly under drinking age held red cups. Adults played reckless pool games that sent water sloshing over the edges. Music blared at painful volumes. From my porch, I watched with growing anxiety. The blocked fire lane troubled me more than the noise or the takeover of community property. What if something happened? What if someone needed help? The wall of vehicles would prevent any emergency response. I considered calling the non-emergency police line but hesitated. Karen had friends on the local force. She made sure everyone knew about her connections. And those who crossed her always seemed to face retribution, mysterious property damage, or suddenly stringent enforcement of obscure HOA rules. So I watched, and I waited, and I felt that familiar knot of frustration form in my stomach, the one that always appeared when Karen flaunted her immunity to the rules she viciously enforced on others. I never imagined how quickly that frustration would turn to horror. The first scream cut through the party noise like a knife, high-pitched, panicked, unmistakably a cry of terror rather than excitement. I had been inside getting a glass of water, but that sound pulled me immediately back to my porch. At the far end of the pool, a cluster of people had formed a circle. In the center, a small body lay on the concrete. "Call 911, someone shouted. "He cannot breathe." I moved without thinking, rushing down my steps and across the street toward the commotion. Breaking through the circle of onlookers, I saw him, a boy no older than 10, his face alarmingly red and swollen, lips turning a terrifying shade of blue. His chest heaved with desperate, wheezing attempts to draw air. A woman knelt beside him, her face contorted with panic. "He has a peanut allergy," she sobbed into her phone. "The brownies. Someone said they were nut-free. Please hurry." Time compressed into a series of frantic moments. Someone shouted for an EpiPen. Another parent ran to check their car. The child's breathing grew more labored, his movements weakening. The distant wail of sirens brought a wave of relief. Help was coming. But then came the realization that struck us all simultaneously. The fire lane was completely blocked. There was no way for emergency vehicles to reach us. Several men ran toward the parked cars, shouting for owners to move them. Panicked party guests fumbled for keys, many too intoxicated to drive. I watched as the first fire truck turned onto our street, lights flashing, only to stop at the mouth of the pool access road. The firefighters immediately recognized the problem. "Clear the lane," the fire captain shouted through a bullhorn. "Move these vehicles now." Chaos erupted. People scrambled toward their cars while others continued to attend to the child, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. Karen was nowhere to be seen, still inside, oblivious to the unfolding emergency. The fire truck inched forward, then stopped again, blocked by Karen's white Range Rover. The captain jumped out, assessed the situation, and made a split-second decision. "Break it open," he ordered. Two firefighters immediately retrieved axes from the truck. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The first swing of the axe connected with the driver's side window of Karen's SUV. Glass shattered outward in a spray of crystals. A firefighter reached through the opening, trying to release the emergency brake or shift the vehicle into neutral. When that failed, they moved to the next strategy. With methodical precision, they smashed each window, then began using the tools to force the hood open. Their objective was clear. They needed to disable the vehicle enough to push it out of the way. Metal groaned and twisted as they worked, oblivious to the gasps of the watching crowd. That was when Karen finally emerged from the pool house, drink in hand. She froze mid-step, her eyes widening at the sight of her beloved vehicle being systematically destroyed. Her scream rivaled the sirens in volume. "What are you doing to my car?" she shrieked, running toward the firefighters. "Stop that immediately." The fire captain did not even glance in her direction. "Ma'am, stand back. We have a medical emergency." "That is a $60,000 vehicle." Karen lunged forward, only to be held back by another firefighter. "And that is a priceless human life," he responded, gesturing toward the child. "Step back now." With the SUV disabled, 6 firefighters pushed it sideways, clearing just enough space for the ambulance to squeeze through. Paramedics rushed to the child, immediately administering epinephrine and placing an oxygen mask over his small face. His mother clutched his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered desperate encouragements. I stood frozen among the crowd, watching the medical team work with urgent efficiency. The party atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy, horrified silence. In that moment, the consequences of Karen's entitlement were laid bare for everyone to see. The only sound that broke through the somber scene was Karen's continued protests about her vehicle. Even as a child fought for his life mere feet away, she demanded insurance information and threatened lawsuits against the fire department. Her voice became background noise as we all focused on the only thing that mattered, whether that little boy would survive. The ambulance departed with lights flashing but no siren, a tentatively positive sign. The paramedics had stabilized the child enough for transport, though his condition remained serious. His mother rode in the ambulance while his father followed in their car, ashen-faced and trembling. The rest of us remained behind, standing amid the wreckage of what had been a celebration. Karen did not watch the ambulance leave. Her attention remained fixed on her devastated vehicle. The white Range Rover now stood as a broken monument to her hubris, windows shattered, hood dented, luxury interior exposed to the elements. The firefighters had already returned to their truck, preparing to depart. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Karen's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. She marched toward the fire captain, phone held aloft as if it were a weapon. "I am recording this. I want your badge number. You had no right to destroy my property." The captain turned to her with a calm that seemed almost supernatural in the face of her fury. "Ma'am, you parked in a clearly marked fire lane, blocking emergency access to a facility serving hundreds of residents. We exercised standard procedure to clear an obstruction during a life-threatening emergency." There were other cars. Karen gestured wildly at the now vacated fire lane. "Why mine? This is targeted harassment." "Yours was blocking the direct access point," he replied simply. "Time was critical." "I will have your job for this," Karen hissed. "And the HOA will be receiving a formal complaint about the confusing signage that caused this situation." Something snapped inside me. After 3 years of watching this woman terrorize our neighborhood, of paying her arbitrary fines, of living in fear of her retribution, I could no longer remain silent. I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Confusing signage." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "The fire lane is painted bright red with clear white lettering that says, 'No parking, fire lane.' How could that possibly be confusing?" Karen whirled to face me, her expression one of profound shock that anyone would dare challenge her publicly. "This is not your concern," she said dismissively. "This is between me and the fire department." "No, it is not." I took another step forward. "It is the concern of everyone who lives here. You specifically instructed people to park in a fire lane for your convenience. You put your party above safety regulations. A child nearly died because emergency services could not reach him quickly." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for allies but finding none. For perhaps the first time, she registered that she was alone in her outrage. "The HOA approved this event," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its conviction. "The HOA approved a pool party," said Robert, stepping forward to stand beside me. "Not blocking emergency access, not endangering lives." "You told everyone the fire lane was reserved for your guests," added Maria, "as if safety rules do not apply to you or your friends." One by one, neighbors began to speak up. Years of accumulated grievances poured out, the arbitrary enforcement, the double standards, the fear. Karen's face flushed deeper with each accusation. "You fined me $300 when my mother's hospice bed was delivered because the truck obstructed community aesthetics," said an older man I recognized from 2 streets over. "But your contractors can park wherever they want when they work on your house." "You cited me for my son's basketball hoop, but ignored the bounce house in your yard for 2 weeks," called another voice. The floodgates had opened. Karen's power had always derived from our silence, our fear of standing alone against her. But now, surrounded by the evidence of what that silence had cost us, we found our voices. Corinne's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally a desperate attempt at control. "This meeting is inappropriate," she declared, as if she could simply adjourn reality. "I will address these concerns at the next HOA session. For now, I suggest everyone go home." No one moved. Instead, we watched as the fire crew finished their documentation of the scene, photographing the vehicle and the fire lane for their report. Before leaving, the captain approached our group. "The hospital will update us on the boy's condition," he said. "For the record, every second counts in anaphylactic shock. The obstruction of the fire lane created a dangerous delay in treatment." He handed Corinne a card. "This has information on how to file an insurance claim, though I should note that emergency services are protected when taking necessary actions during a response." With that, the fire truck departed, leaving us in a strange limbo of shattered glass and shattered illusions. Corinne stood alone beside her damaged vehicle, her empire of fear crumbling around her. For the first time, she seemed small, not the towering figure who had dominated our community, but simply a woman whose selfishness had been exposed in the harshest possible light. The party was over, but something else had just begun. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening. The printed notices appeared on our doors with unusual haste, Corinne clearly hopping to seize control of the narrative before it slipped entirely from her grasp. The meeting agenda listed only one official item: discussion of pool safety protocols and emergency vehicle access. Word had spread quickly about the incident. The boy, whose name we learned was Ethan, had survived thanks to the quick intervention of the paramedics. His parents had shared updates through our neighborhood social media group, expressing profound gratitude to the first responders who had saved their son. Notably absent from their messages was any mention of Corinne or why those responders had been delayed. The community center was packed when I arrived. Every chair was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls. Corinne sat at the board table up front, flanked by the other HOA officers who typically served as her rubber stamp. She had traded her party attire for a conservative blue blazer, her expression severe and businesslike. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began once the room quieted. "Saturday's unfortunate incident has highlighted some safety concerns that need immediate attention." "Unfortunate incident?" a voice interrupted from the back. It was Ethan's father, Michael. I had not noticed him enter. "My son nearly died. That is not an incident. That is a catastrophe that never should have happened." Corinne forced a sympathetic expression. "Of course, and we are all thankful that Ethan is recovering, which is why I have drafted new guidelines to prevent such situations in the future." She lifted a document and began reading. "Effective immediately. No private parties may use the pool without board approval. Children with known allergies must be accompanied by a parent at all pool events. And most importantly, no parking within 50 feet of emergency access points." The room remained silent as she finished, but it was the silence of disbelief rather than agreement. Finally, Robert spoke up. "These all sound like good rules," he said carefully. "But they already exist. The issue was not a lack of rules, but the fact that they were ignored. By you." Corinne's smile stiffened. "I understand emotions are running high, but personal accusations are not productive." "This is not an accusation. It is a fact," I said, standing from my seat. "You specifically told guests to park in the fire lane. You parked there yourself. There is nothing ambiguous about this situation." The HOA secretary, a timid man who rarely spoke against Karen, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should review exactly what happened for clarity. What followed was unexpected. From his laptop bag, Michael produced a flash drive. "I have security footage," he announced. "From my doorbell camera, it shows the entire fire lane and pool entrance." Karen's face drained of color. "That is not on the agenda. We cannot just introduce unvetted materials into an official meeting." But it was too late. Another board member had already connected the flash drive to the projector. The room watched in silence as video played, clearly showing Karen directing cars to park along the red curb, pointing out spaces, even guiding her own SUV into its fateful position directly in front of the gate. The footage continued, capturing the moment of crisis. The frantic attempts to clear vehicles, the arrival of the fire truck, the desperate measures taken to move Karen's SUV. Most damning of all was the audio, which captured her screaming about her vehicle while paramedics worked on Ethan. When the video ended, the room remained deathly quiet. Then, from the back row, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman once fined for her Christmas decorations, stood up. "I move to vote for the immediate removal of Karen Henderson from the HOA board," she said, her voice quavering but determined, "on grounds of negligence and endangerment of community safety." "I second the motion," said Robert immediately. Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is outrageous. You cannot call an emergency vote without proper notice. It violates our bylaws." I stepped forward, holding up the community charter that I had studied carefully the night before. Actually, Article 7, Section 3 states that any board member may be removed by majority vote at any official meeting if their actions are deemed harmful to the community welfare. This is a properly noticed official meeting. For a moment, Karen looked genuinely frightened. Then her composure returned, and she glanced around the room with a dismissive smile. "Fine, let us vote then. Those with legitimate concerns can express them properly." She had miscalculated badly. When the secretary called for a show of hands, nearly every person in the room voted for her removal. Only 2 abstained, her next-door neighbors who had benefited from her selective enforcement for years. "The motion carries," the secretary announced, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Karen Henderson is removed from the board effective immediately." Karen's face contorted with fury. She grabbed her purse and papers, knocking over her chair in the process. "This neighborhood was nothing before I took charge," she snarled. "You will regret this, every single one of you." She stormed toward the exit, the crowd parting silently before her. At the door, she turned for one final proclamation. "And I will be suing the fire department for damages. That is a promise." The door slammed behind her with thunderous finality. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tension in the room began to dissipate. People exchanged glances, then smiles, then quiet words of relief. The HOA vice president, suddenly elevated to acting president, cleared his throat awkwardly. "I believe we still have some business to address. The board now has a vacancy." "I nominate the person who stood up first," said Michael from the back. "The one who finally said what we were all thinking." He pointed directly at me. And just like that, my 3 years of anonymous existence in Meadowbrook Estates came to an end. The transformation of our community did not happen overnight, but it began immediately. The day after Karen's removal, a crew arrived to repaint the fire lane with even brighter red paint and add reflective markers along its length. New signs were installed, larger and more visible than before, with clear warnings about towing and emergency access. My first action as a new board member was to propose a complete review of the HOA bylaws. For too long, they had served as weapons rather than guidelines. We formed a committee of diverse residents, young families, retirees, renters, and homeowners, to identify rules that were outdated, unnecessarily restrictive, or simply petty. The purpose of a community association should be to enhance quality of life, not diminish it, I explained at our first official meeting. Safety is non-negotiable, but many of these aesthetic regulations serve no practical purpose. Over the following months, we eliminated fines for minor infractions like garbage can placement, relaxed restrictions on garden plantings, and created a more transparent violation notification system with reasonable timeframes for correction. Most importantly, we established an appeals process that prevented any single board member from having unilateral enforcement authority. As the rules changed, so did the atmosphere. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other began to connect. Gardens bloomed with formerly unauthorized flowers. Children played more freely in front yards. The community pool, once Karen's de facto private domain, became a genuine gathering place. Karen herself remained in the neighborhood, though her influence had vanished entirely. She kept to herself, her pristine lawn now standing out not as an aspiration, but as a sterile island in a sea of more personalized, lived-in homes. Occasionally, I would glimpse her watching from her window as residents chatted on sidewalks or children rode bikes past her house. 6 weeks after the incident, we held our first community potluck at the pool. Tables overflowed with dishes representing the diverse backgrounds of our residents. Music played at a reasonable volume. Children splashed in the water under the watchful eyes of many adults, a community taking collective responsibility for safety. Ethan and his family attended, his recovery complete. His mother embraced me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for speaking up," she whispered. "We never felt welcome here before, now it feels like home." As the sun began to set, I found myself standing near the repainted fire lane. Robert joined me, nodding toward the bright red curb. "Best-looking fire lane in the county," he observed with a smile. "And the most respected," I added. Not a single vehicle had parked there despite the large turnout. Instead, people had carpooled, walked, or parked farther away and carried their dishes to the pool. Looking around at the laughing, mingling crowd, I realized we had gained something precious. Not just safety, but community. Not just freedom from fear, but the joy of belonging. Karen had ruled through isolation and intimidation. Without her, we had discovered how much stronger we were together. As if summoned by my thoughts, a white sedan, Karen's replacement for her axed SUV, drove slowly past the pool. She did not look our way, but I could feel her awareness of what was happening, of what she had lost. Not just a position of power, but a place in a community that could have welcomed her had she chosen connection over control. The sedan disappeared around the corner, and I turned back to the celebration. To the neighborhood we were rebuilding, one conversation, one rule change, one shared meal at a time. 3 months after the pool incident, I received an unexpected phone call. A reporter from the local news wanted to interview me about the HOA revolution in Meadowbrook Estates. Apparently, word of our reforms had spread to other communities struggling with overbearing associations. "People are interested in how you managed to transform your governance so completely," she explained, "especially after such a dramatic incident." I agreed to meet her at the community center, unsure what to expect. When I arrived, I found not just the reporter but a small camera crew setting up. The story, it seemed, was bigger than I had realized. "We have been covering a lawsuit filed against the county fire department," the reporter explained during our pre-interview chat. "A former HOA board member claimed they unnecessarily damaged her vehicle during an emergency response. The case was dismissed yesterday." I was not surprised. Corinne's legal battle had been doomed from the start. Emergency responders have broad latitude when lives are at stake, and the video evidence had made her position indefensible. Still, she had pursued it with characteristic stubbornness, probably more concerned with saving face than recovering damages. When the cameras began rolling, the reporter asked about the incident itself, then delved into the changes we had implemented since. "Your HOA has become something of a model for others," she noted. "You have managed to maintain property values while creating a more inclusive environment. What was the key to this transition?" I considered the question carefully. "Fear," I finally answered. "For years we were all afraid of fines, of conflict, of standing alone against authority. That fear kept us isolated from each other. When we finally spoke up together, we realized the power had always been ours. We just needed the courage to use it." "And what would you say to other communities facing similar situations?" I glanced at the repainted fire lane visible through the window. "Safety should never be negotiable. Neither should human dignity. Rules exist to protect people, not to control them. If your HOA has lost sight of that, it is time for change." After the interview aired, something unexpected happened. Emails began arriving from other neighborhoods, asking for copies of our revised bylaws and advice on implementing similar changes. Our little community became a reference point for HOA reform across the county. Corinne, meanwhile, put her house on the market 6 months after her failed lawsuit. I saw her occasionally during that period, loading items into moving boxes or speaking with real estate agents. She never acknowledged me or any other neighbors. The day her sold sign appeared, I felt not triumph but a complicated mixture of relief and something like compassion. On her final day in Meadowbrook, as the moving truck pulled away, I spotted her standing alone on her empty driveway. On impulse, I crossed the street and approached her. She stiffened as I drew near. "Have you come to gloat?" she asked, her voice devoid of its former authority. I shook my head, "Just to say goodbye and to wish you well in your new community." She studied me skeptically. "I did what I thought was best for this neighborhood. Someone had to maintain standards." "I believe you," I said, and meant it. "But standards without humanity just create beautiful prisons." Corinne did not respond directly. Instead, she glanced toward the pool area where the bright red fire lane stood as a monument to the day everything changed. "That boy, Ethan, he is completely recovered." "Yes, he is on the swim team now." She nodded once, a gesture that contained neither apology nor regret, but perhaps a glimmer of understanding. Without another word, she turned and walked to her car, a modest sedan rather than the luxury SUV she once paraded through the neighborhood. I watched her drive away, her departure marking the final chapter of a story that had changed us all. Later that evening, I walked to the pool and stood beside the fire lane, remembering how a moment of crisis had revealed both the worst and best of our community. A year has passed since then. Our neighborhood has continued to evolve. The fire lane remains clear at all times, a sacred boundary that no one, not even temporary visitors, dares to cross. It serves as a reminder that rules matter most when they protect what is truly valuable. Not property, not appearances, but the people who transform houses into homes and streets into communities. Sometimes, when new residents move in, I share this story with them. Not to demonize Karen, but to illustrate what we learned through her reign and fall. That silence enables tyrants. That fear dismantles community. And that sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us of what matters most. The axe that shattered Karen's window also broke the spell she had cast over Meadowbrook Estates. In the fragments of glass that littered the pavement that day, we caught reflections of who we had become and who we could be instead. We chose to change. We chose to stand together. We chose to speak. And in doing so, we reclaimed not just our neighborhood, but our voices.